Hey everyone, welcome to the Qt Virtual TechCon 2020 webinar, What's New in Design Studio 1.5. Thank you all for attending. My name is Mark Perez. I'm the Director of Sales in the Americas for the Qt company, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So I'm very pleased to introduce you to two of our speakers, Thomas Hartman, R&D Manager, and Brooke Cronin, Senior UI UX Designer at Qt. Before I hand over the mic to the speakers, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items for us to cover throughout the presentation. So you are aware, today's webinars are going to be available on demand after the live sessions, so you can return to the live event page to watch them at a later time. If you do have questions for our speakers, feel free to send them through the QA chat, and we will be addressing them at the end of the presentation. So with that being said, and without further ado, please allow me to kick things off by welcoming you to our speakers, Thomas Hartman and Brooke Cronin. Over to you, Thomas and Brooke.
Thank you for the nice introduction. Hello, welcome to the Virtual TechCon 2020, What's New in Qt Design Studio, a quick tour by Brooke Cronin and myself, Thomas Hartman. So Brooke Cronin is the UI UX designer for Qt Design Studio, and myself, I'm the lead engineer for Qt Design Studio. We've been both involved in the development of Qt Design Studio from the start and work for the Qt company. So about this talk, first I want to give a brief overview about what Qt Design Studio is and what you can do with it. Then I will give a short outlook and present the roadmap. Then Brooke will introduce the new feature, what this talk is all about, and then we will demo them, which will take the majority of the time. And in the end, we can have a short discussion and Q&A session. So what is Qt Design Studio? It's Qt dedicated design tool, supposed to be used by designers. It's for creating UI and UX in 2D and 3D, and it's using QML, which is Qt's domain-specific language for defining UIs. So in short, it's a tool that allows you to develop the UIs in QML without having to code or write text. So what can you do with it? Yes. So first, you can import design and assets from other design tools and other tools. So for example, you can import your designs from Photoshop and Sketch, and you can even, in the case of Sketch, keep the componentization. And also in the case of Photoshop, we support smart objects. So smart objects are turned into components. In the case of 3D, we have Maya and Blender supported, so we can export those 3D designs into QML. And yeah, you get immediately working QML, which represents the assets you had either in your 2D or 3D tool. We even preserve animations from the 3D tools. And yeah. But that's not the only thing you can do. You can also develop UI designs in QML from scratch. That means you can use Qt Quick Controls 2, your own components that you developed or that were provided to you from a third party. You can also use, of course, the components that are part of Qt Design Studio. And then you can develop your UI designs in QML from scratch. But it's not only about how it looks, but you can also animate it. So you can animate your screen transitions, you can animate micro animations, startup screens. You can also do what we call parameterizations. That means you animate, in a certain sense, a gauge or progress bar, but not in time, but you basically define how this control looks when you change a continuous value, like the speed or the progress. You can also define the states of your controls and your UI. So we have a state editor where you can define states, and you can also define the behavior. So you can define when to change states and when to start animations, these kind of things. So it doesn't stop with look and feel. It's really also about with look. It's really about the look and feel. Yeah, and last but not least, you can also deploy and run your QML application on the target hardware and even profile it. And target hardware in this case means, for example, your iMac 6 or iMac 8 device, your Android device, and of course also on the desktop. So Qt is very strong in the embedded space, so that's why we concentrate on embedded hardware a lot, but you can also support any kind of desktop hardware. And with Qt for WebAssembly, we, to some degree, run even on the web. Yes, we released Qt Design Studio in December 2018. This was the first release. And since then, we have continuously released new Qt Design Studio versions with new features. So the sketch support came a bit later. And in Qt Design Studio 1.4, we added the Qt Quick 3D support. So before there was no 3D support at all. And now in May, in a few days, we will release Qt Design Studio 1.5. And the main features are a totally reworked docking system. So the whole workspace arrangement is totally redeveloped. We will show that. Also the flow editor, Brook will show that. The 3D integration has been improved a lot. I will show that a bit. Annotations and a couple of other small minor additions. Before we start with Brook's part, where we introduce the new feature for 1.5, I also want to give a short outlook a bit in the future, a bit further. So this is basically our research roadmap. What's green is already part of 1.4, so it's already out, so it's kind of done. So we did the visual 3D editing, we did alignment tools, we improved the binding editor, we have a very strong easing curve editor that's already all in 1.4. This talk is about the yellow items, mostly the flow editor, the workspaces, also a bit the annotations. This will be released soon in a few days. But we also plan, of course, for the future, for the next releases of Qt Design Studio. And one thing we really will concentrate on is a shared library to support team collaboration. So we totally understand that the current situation, how you share components and how you collaborate when you share components, also how you collaborate on your designs, that's not the end of the story, that it has to be improved. So we will at least redevelop the item library totally from scratch. So it makes team collaboration a lot easier in sharing components and also turning components that are part of your projects into libraries and so on. And another thing we will look closely into is style management. So how to create styles, how to style your button, these kind of things, and also how to create UI variants or what's called variant management. So if I have like really the same application for different form factors, how we can make it as easy as possible to support this workflows. So we already have a lot of functionality there, the anchors, the layouts, but yeah, variant management is supported in QML, but not really in the tooling. Yes, and now I will give over to Brook, and he will shortly introduce all the features for 1.5 before we do the demonstration. Brook.
Thanks, Thomas. Let me just share my screen. I hope you can hear me properly and see my slides. Let's just pull that into full screen. So the new features that we're going to be covering today are here as follows in 1.5. Now, this is a big improvement to the Qt Quick 3D integration, an entirely new mode for Design Studio called the UX Flow mode, an entirely new advanced docking system, and an annotation editor, which is also an entirely new feature. And what do we mean by these? So for the first point, for the Qt Quick 3D integration, the main feature I would say is that the 3D edit view is now fully integrated into Design Studio. So it's a window very similar to the text view or the form edit. It can be docked anywhere, as you will see with the dock widgets, and you can create your own custom views using that 3D mode to see it side by side with your form editor preview. The asset importer has been improved, and you can now convert 3D files from lots of other tools, so Blender and Maya, and plenty of other 3D tools, and bring them directly into Design Studio via QML. And there have been lots of general under the hood improvements for the Quick 3D integration. The UX Flow mode is, as I said, a completely new mode, and this allows you to create complex UI flow diagrams that you can run directly in live preview, so you can generate click-through prototypes from your flows without touching any code at all. We've included input from the user, input from the back end, and wildcards, which again allow you to bring in a screen from any triggered input. So that could be from a button press or a key binding or something else. And you can also add and modify transition effects directly to your flow. So put into the property panel, and again, don't require any coding. And you can generate click-through prototypes from these with the push of a button. And I'll be demonstrating that a bit later on. The third new feature we have is an advanced docking system. Now, for a long time, Design Studio was bound to one workspace window. And now we've completely changed that, and you can now create multi-screen setups in Design Studio. You can have your own presets for different types of Design Studio tasks, as we recognize that there are different tasks for different users, so more engineering focused or animation focused or 3D focused or 2D focused. You can create and store these custom views for your own workflow. You can share those with your colleagues via exporting them. And yes, you can create multi-screen setups. And it has other advanced docking features that you're probably familiar with from other tools, such as drop areas with indicators. And the fourth new feature we're going to demonstrate today is our annotation editor. Now, this allows you to add annotations to any item in a file. You can preview those annotations in the form editor. You can add multiple notes for any annotation indeed. So that's, a really useful feature for collaborative work with Design Studio. Okay, so now I think we're going to come to some demos, which means that I should hand back to Thomas for those demonstrations, and he's going to show the first two items, and then I'll come back later on for the second set of demos. So if I stop sharing. All right, and you can take over the screen again now, Thomas.
So let's go to the demo. So the first thing that you will see when you start Design Studio 1.5 the first time is that we really redid how the dock widgets work. So yeah, should start now any second. Let's take this one today. Yes, it is. So if you have seen like any version of Qt Design Studio before, then we had these sidebars. We also had this part on the bottom already in the other sidebar, but it was very limited how you can configure it. So here, for example, that's kind of the default layout we have with the timeline and the states on the bottom. But I can drag this out, for example, now have a top level window on its own of that, or I can put it back. And of course, I can also take the item library and put it back in here. So now I have the item library on the bottom inside the, next to the timeline and the states. And this was a contribution to Qt or to Qt Creator by Uwe Kindler. It's called the Qt docking system, and that we use now all over the place. And that now makes it really easy, for example, to take the form editor, drag it out to another window, and use it on a different screen, which is actually quite common use case, especially if you want to mix 2D and 3D, because this is kind of what I want to show now. So this is actually a 3D scene that you see here, and you see no 3D view at this point in time. This is because I'm in the essential mode. This is a pre-defined preset from us, where we don't have the 3D mode active. So I can go to the 3D preset, for example, and then it will show that. So now we have a 3D editor here in the tab. I can drag that out, and we can also go, for example, back to my default or to the factory presets. So I kind of prefer my workspace, which is the default one. And yeah, whenever you lose a window, you can of course always get it back from here. So the 3D editor is actually not here. So we have to activate it. And for now, I will put the 3D editor on top of everything else because I only have a single screen here. So you can see everything. And yeah, to basically have a parallel view, I will just temporarily put it on top. And if you have used 1.4, the 3D editor was actually always a floating window. Just to emphasize, it's not fully integrated in the dock system, so it's not a floating window anymore. It's fully integrated like all the other windows. And oops, now I docked it. Undock it. And it also, the usability was vastly improved. So you can easily pan around here, move back and forth and so on. You can basically go to the current item. You can also switch between orthogonal and perspective, whatever you prefer. Yeah, that was already there. You can turn on and off the grid. All these kinds of standard 3D features. So what I have here now is San Miguel, which is actually quite complex scene, I guess. So we have a directional light here. So let's just select that. And the nice thing is that shadows are enabled. That means if I move that thing around, oops, that was the wrong direction. In this direction here, you see that. Don't you see that? Ah, yeah, my fault. I don't have to move it. It's a directional light. I have to rotate it, of course. So let's do that. So if I rotate it, of course, then we see how the shadow changes. And yeah, we can use that to add a bit of animation to this. So the timeline was existed already before, but now it's also fully functional for the 3D part. So we can now turn on the record button, and then we can rotate the light a bit. So we create a keyframe, maybe like that. Now we can go to the end of our animation, pressing this button. And now we rotate it like, well, maybe that's a bit too far, like this. And now if we move this aside, and if you drag the frame handle here, you see that's basically like the sun would move. You basically see the shadows changing. And maybe we can also move the camera a bit. So we do the same trick. Go to the beginning. We just move a tiny bit the camera. And then go to the end. Oops. Yep. And again, we have an animation. And we also move the camera a bit. So now I will close the 3D preview. Just look at this again. You can extend the timeline so we see all the keyframes. But there's nothing new there. This is all from 1.4. Let's play the live preview once just to see what we did here. And now should be able to see the animation. And it's ping-ponging back and forth. Okay, to make this a bit more interesting, I want to show you the curve editor, which technically already was in 1.4, but it got quite a lot of polish. So this timeline here has been there since the first release, but since 1.4, we also have this relatively advanced curve editor that is basically what you're used to from 3D tools. So here we see all our animations, all the properties that are animated with their respective curve. And we can select them. We can select all of them together. Then we see all the curve in one view. We can also, let's say, we don't want to ever change that one. Then we can lock it. And we can also pin it, for example. Now it's pinned. That means we will always see it. So in all other views, we will always see this gray curve here. But since it's locked, we can't change it. That basically means we can always use it as a reference. For example, if you want to time animations. And yeah, let's just do a bit of stuff here. So we just go to this curve and say insert keyframe. Now I inserted a keyframe directly in the middle. You can drag this around, of course. This will change the behavior of the animation a bit. And we can select these keyframes and let's say we make them round, we give them handles. And then we can say, hey, you here, I want to unify. So this means the tangent is always kept. So I can move that around a bit. I can insert another keyframe. In this case, maybe I don't unify. then, oops, the tangent is not fixed. So now I can basically have it, it's still continuous, but the not C1 continuous. So the first derivative is not continuous anymore. The editor already, you see that it blocks you from doing things that make technically no sense, right? You can't move this tangent back because then it would not be, mathematicians would call injective anymore, and then wouldn't make sense as an animation curve. Okay, and so I can play around, and then maybe I'm now done with this curve, so let's lock it, or maybe also pin it so we see it from here on, and then we can take another curve, maybe this one. Oh, maybe we unpin this, doing this, and yeah, we insert another keyframe here, and you can kind of do the same. So we can again make it round and tweak the handles, for example. Yeah, and this way it's really very powerful to create, especially 3D animations. All tools have this kind of paradigm to do their animations. So I can now close this dialog again, go back to the standard timeline, and you see it's basically just a different view on the same thing. You see that wherever we ended, we change the tangents, we have this easing curve. So we could now go here and say edit easing curve, and then we see the easing curve that I applied. But here you can't control the tangents. That's one of the big disadvantages of this mode. It's very easy to use, but you have less control over the tangents. Okay. Yeah, and I think this is what I wanted to show. So now I will give back to Brook for the flow editor.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. That's great. My file here ready to go. And this is the new flow mode that will be part of Design Studio 1.5. I hope that you can all still see this properly. It's giving me some warnings that my internet connection is a bit unstable. So I'm going to go very slowly to try and make sure that the screen is stable enough for people to see. Now, what do we mean by a flow? Well, you can think of it like a schematic diagram that connects all of the screens in your UI. And in this case, our diagram can be used to generate an actual working prototype of an app. And as you see here, each of these lines is the connection between the different screens, and we call these transitions. And with each transition, you can have an effect that is defined per transition. And that effect is what you see when one screen changes into another. So it could be a fade or a push. It could be, you know, a left to right push. Later on, we also have here other nodes in this flow diagram. So we have something called the decision node, in which case, when you hit a decision node in your flow diagram, you will ask the user a question, and depending on which answer they give, that will depend on the route out of that decision node and which screen they go to next. And also, finally, we have something called a wildcard node. Now, wildcards, I'm not going to demonstrate working today, so we can just maybe discuss them quickly here. A wildcard essentially means any screen connected to this wildcard would appear when an event is triggered. Now, that event can be defined by the designer, by the engineer, and that could be an external button press, a key binding, something to simulate input from the back end. And also with the wildcards, you have something called a whitelist and a blacklist. And that essentially means a whitelist means every screen in the whitelist can be transitioned from into the wildcard screen, and every screen in the blacklist cannot be transitioned from into the wildcard screen. So if you had a warning screen and an incoming call screen attached to your wildcard, you might say that the incoming call is not allowed to come during the warning screen, and so on. Now, this is a slightly more complex diagram, which we're going to come back to in a little bit, but I thought what I'd do is start with a very basic introduction and showing you how to create a very, very simple flow and what you would need to do in order to actually do this for yourself. So let me just make sure that my other project is active and come in here. And this is just a standard UI QML blank project created from the Design Studio wizards. Now, in order to actually have which is where we place our screens that we want to connect together, and we also need those flow screens themselves. We can add those by coming into the file wizard in Design Studio. So if you come up to the file, new file or project, and you come into the wizard here. Now there are these two new items in our wizard. So we have the flow view itself, which is the main file, and the flow item, which are the screens. So let's start by adding a flow view, and let's call that my flow view. And let's add that, should be fine. We'll zoom out a bit, just pan up to the top corner where we add stuff in. Okay, now this is an empty flow view, and you can see here in the library that inside this flow view, we already have some of these things that I was talking about. So the decision node, the wildcard, and actually a way of dragging a flow item into the flow view already. Now I'm going to stick to the wizards for now. So let's go back here and add a flow item. And we'll call this first one my flow item 1. And once we generate that, we see that it is actually just a UI.qml file, but it's a specific type of UI.qml file that we've created that the flow editor is aware of. So when you're in that flow editor, I've already created some content here, so I can just drag this in just as a bit of demo content. But otherwise it is just a standard UI file. So you can build your components in a very similar way that you're aware of. You could, for example, bring in some quick controls and bring in a quick control button that we can use to prototype with. And let's save that one. And we need 2 of them, obviously, because we want to connect them together. So let's create a second one. We'll call that my flow item 2. And in this case, I've got another mock-up screen here, and I've just put a little triangle there to sort of illustrate a back button, and you'll see why I've done that in a second. Okay, and now you can see inside this flow view that these 2 flow files I've created are visible as my QML components, because these are the only type of files that the flow view can work with. What we can do is just drag them in. I'll zoom in a bit. And now what we actually need to do is create these action areas and the connections to generate our flow. Now, to do that, everything that we need for the flow mode is here in this context menu. So you can right click on an item in your flow view. And the first thing that we want to do is create this flow action. A flow action in its simplest form is essentially a modified click region that when we run this in the live preview will allow us to click on a part of the screen and transition to the next screen in our flow. Actually, they are more complicated than that. And obviously, because of the way that Design Studio works and componentization works, the flow action areas can be mapped to any signal emitting from any component or subcomponent of your flow screen. But they can also be used in a prototyping fashion to just create a click region that allows you to click on that area of the screen and transition to the next item. And that's how we're going to do it today. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing this. We could hit the context menu again, go to connect and connect to the next flow item, and you'll see here a list of available options. Or you can actually double click on the flow item, drag out a line, and then just click to the area that you want to click on. Now you see it's actually generated this. Let's just create another action on this page. We'll position that roughly over this back button. And instead of reconnecting this to the original screen, I'm actually going to use a little trick that we've put in here and just make this a go back action. So obviously that's really, really useful because in many cases, you don't want to necessarily have to draw this connection line to go back to every possible screen. So we've made it possible to just make a go back flow action area, and that's always going to take you back to whichever screen you were on previously in the flow. So if I save that now and run it, we should see that we have a very simple transition. Okay, so let's add an effect to that. To do that, we can actually select this transition line here. And again, we'll right click, we'll go to flow effects, and we can choose from the list of effects here. So let's choose this move effect. And here we see we have some parameters for this move effect. So we can choose the move direction, we have the duration, and we have the easing curve that we can apply to that effect. We can just leave that as from left, but as you see, we could actually bring that move direction in from any direction. And because I know it's probably a little bit slow and you don't see the very fast transitions, let's make that a quite slow duration. And what we can do is add a bit of an easing curve that just accelerates as that move happens. Okay, so now when I run this, you should see a very slow and then speeding up effect where it just moves across the screen. And we can use that with different effects for every different transition. And we can actually even, with the live preview open, effect and change some process. So we could change the direction to come from the top. That's going to reset. And when we do it this time, you see that that's green just slides in over the top. And you can leave the live preview running and fiddle with all of these effects in real time and actually see that updated here in the live preview. Okay, so this is the very basic way of creating a flow for yourself. Let's go back and have a little bit of a look at the other one that we've got here. And here you see I've actually created a slightly more complicated diagram to illustrate some of the different things that you can do with the flow mode. So while it's up and while we're at the default root flow view item, we can have a little bit of a look at the settings that we've got here. So you have settings that you can actually set all of the global display preferences for your flow. So if we wanted to say change the all of the transition lines, all of the colors for the transition lines, we can come up and do that here. And this is going to set every transition to that color. And we can also set all of these individually. If I wanted to click on one, I can actually change that one specific transition color here. I can turn that into a dashed line, say if I had a certain pathway that I wanted to make visually clear for people. There are other things such as the in and out offset, which actually change where the lines come in and out. So you can get in and you can model a bit your flow if the lines are getting a little bit confusing. And you can set, now it's maybe better if I do that globally, but I'll show that here. You can have these kind of straight lines with a radius, or you can have Bezier lines with a Bezier factor. Curve those lines, so you can actually kind of change the appearance of your flow to suit your needs for that specific flow diagram. Now, earlier on, I was talking about decision nodes. In this case, I have a decision node in here. And what happens when you hit that decision node, as I said, is the user will be asked a question. And each pathway that comes out of that decision node to another screen allows you to put in a question for that pathway. So in this case, we've kind of modeled a abstract login sign up process here. And at this point here, where we're saying that the user is going to put in a username and a password, we want to check if these credentials are correct. Now, obviously, we don't have a way of doing that, but what we do is just ask and simulate that. Are the credentials correct or not? And so you can see that within each line, I get to put in a question. In one is credentials false, and one is credentials correct. And when we hit that part of the flow diagram, we're going to be asked that question, and then depending on which choice we make, we'll move into a different screen. So the other thing that we have here, of course, is this start node. So if I'm on a specific screen, I can always come in and I can say set flow start. And what that means is that whenever I run that, this is going to be the first screen that you see in that flow diagram. And as I mentioned before, the wildcard isn't integrated yet. We still need to do a little bit of work on that. But when that is integrated, then you can also have these kind of floating screens that can come in. You mess up your design by connecting lines to every single screen in your flow, which, as you can imagine, with a complex project, could become visually confusing very fast. So let me just run this one so I can show you the decisions. You should be able to see that now. And from here, I can go through the different pathways in this design. So if I come down here, log in or sign up, and let's say log in, and I put in my username and password, and then I hit OK. And there you see it's going to actually pop up that decision. And let's say, OK, the credentials are correct. Then I come to my home screen. And if I run that again, go through the same pathway, but this time the credentials are false. It's going to take me back to that login or sign up screen. And then I'm asked about some terms and conditions, and then I go back again to my final home screen here. And there you see we are capable of building up a pretty complex flow diagram without having to touch any code, purely design based. And we can add different custom effects for every transition. We can model decisions and more complex kind of signal slot actions, so we can actually eventually tie these to actions coming from the components. And really, that's sort of all I want to show you for the flow stuff today, because I think that's enough to take in for a very new feature. But briefly before I go, I wanted to talk a little bit about annotations. So I'm just going to remove that old annotation there, and let's add it again. So annotations are a way of creating notes in your file that could be for the designer or could be for the engineer or the product manager, that allow you to essentially annotate any single item in the flow file, any single item in a QML UI file, and create multiple annotations, multiple notes per file. So there's two ways of doing this. We can do it through the context menu here. And you see that launches our annotation editor. We can give that a custom ID. So which screen was that? That was the create account. So let's say create account. What should author, and then my text here. And once I've created that annotation, you're going to see here there's a little symbol that's now above that flow item. And by clicking on it, I can see that note. Also, on a full annotation, I can add multiple notes. So I can have a different one here, and I can have need to ask dev team me and my text. Okay. Now we see that we actually have this kind of threaded note per annotation that we can easily just turn on and off, and we can add those to any single item in the file. And if I click away to another item, it's going to hide those, so you only see them for the active item. And of course, this is in the flow mode here, but I can also drill down into that single component, that screen component that I have, and I could add an annotation to a button. So I could actually do it this time via the property panel. So I can say add annotation here, and we say button graphics or something. This is a placeholder, needs a real button. Now you see the annotation is here of the sub item of this UI file itself. So I can actually annotate every single item in my UI files. If I click away, I don't see that annotation, so it's on a per item basis. And I can always come back up to my main flow file. And my old annotations for that one are still there. Okay, so that really is everything I wanted to cover.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we go back to the slides, because there's a question. Can you show the QML code for that?
Yep, absolutely. No problem at all. If I, you want to see the flow file QML, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So let's just drag that in. And in this case, I could have, used one of our new doc widget presets to bring that up. So I could have actually gone to the 2D code doc widget preset, and that would have achieved exactly the same thing to bring that code up. So let me here. And I'll just slowly scroll through that up to the top. And there you see the flow view itself, the connections, the flow decisions, the transitions are all there as very readable, very transparent QML. And if you're not just a designer, if you're someone who is an engineer, of course, then you could actually work on the code itself. But as a designer myself, I prefer to use the more visual interface for this type of work. But the beauty of Qt Design Studio is that it really is multi-purpose, and it allows people of different skills and different talents to approach these problems in their own way. So is that all right? I hope that everybody's sort of satisfied. If not, we can always jump back in during the question phase and we can have a look at things in more detail. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Where am I here? So what else do we want to discuss? Qt Design Studio 1.5 is going to be available on the 20th of May. If you already are a license holder, you can get that directly from the maintenance tool. Or if you're a new customer who's interested in getting hold of Design Studio, you can now actually buy that directly from the Qt website. So if you go to that website address, you will see a page there where you could buy a Design Studio license directly. And the extensions and the plugins are also now available in the marketplace. So if you're looking for the Photoshop or SketchBridge or the asset importer, that can all now be found in the marketplace. And with that, I think that's the end of what I have to say. And if you have any questions, I'm sure there are, we can go through them now.
Yes, thank you, Brooke, thank you. Yeah, there are lots of questions, so we really need a bit of time for all of these. So the first question is if the slides are available later on. To be honest, I don't know how the slides are shared, but we will share our slides with our marketing department, and then I think they can be shared with you. Otherwise, you can also contact us directly. Those slides are not a secret at all. The next question is Qt Design Studio not fully integrated in Qt Creator? And that's actually a good question, because technically Qt Design Studio is part of Qt Creator in a sense. So all of this is basically part of Qt Creator, but we rebranded as Qt Design Studio to make the life of less technical people easier. Qt Creator is a C++ IDE, and we don't want people like Brooke or designers of pure front-end developers to deal with a heavy tool like Qt Creator. This is why we kind of rebranded, removed a lot of functionality and called it Qt Design Studio. And then there's also the community edition of that for open source usage. But all of these features are also in Qt Creator. It's just that the release schedule is a bit different, or nearly all of them. We'll come to that a bit later. And also the flow editor is part of Qt Creator, and you can use it in Qt Creator in theory, just that things are maybe a little less polished because of the different release cycles and so on. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question. Very few things are closed source, like the Bridge and Photoshop importer and a couple of other small minor items. Yes, the next question is if QDS is only available under commercial license. And now there's also a community version. We call it community version because not every part is technically open source. 99% are, but 1% is not. We call it a community version. You can download that from our webpage. It's missing the Sketch importer, the Photoshop imported, also for licensing issues, has, for example, no ISO icons because we are not allowed to give them away for free. But yeah, this is the community version you can download for free for non-commercial use. Then there's a question that with the latest beta, the U3D crashes the live preview. I'm not aware of this. As you saw, I was running the live preview and it did not crash on my system. So I still believe that the crash is real. So I can only ask you to download the latest RC from the maintenance tool and try if it's still there, the bug. If yes, just file a bug report. And then in Qt Creator under help, or in Qt Design Studio under help, you can print out the system diagnostics that help with these kind of bugs, because if it's not happening on every machine, then it might be graphic driver related or something like that. Okay, next question.
Changing the controls with touch controls. No, as a Mac user, unfortunately, that's not available yet, but it is something that we're working on. So touch controls hopefully will be in a upcoming release for Design Studio.
Yes.
Minimum system requirements. Well, most modern laptop, desktop computers are fine for running Design Studio.
Yes.
I don't think we have a strict minimum per se, do we? But
no, Windows 10 and then I think the latest 2 versions of macOS. It's a bit heavier on the CPU and memory than you would intuitively think, because we basically have this real runtime underneath with a code model, and so it's a bit heavier, but every decent machine should be able to run it. Yeah, the next question, that's also a question we always get, or very, very often get, is if it's possible to simultaneously have a QML project and a Pro project for QMake. Yeah, that's possible, and that's actually something that I advise. Maybe you don't want to use QMake and you prefer CMake, that's also possible. But usually my advice is to have 2 projects, one for the designer and front-end developer with no C++ dependencies, that's easy to run, easy to deploy, and then one for the real developer. We have a few simple examples already in Qt Creator itself where we follow that pattern. So basically, you can even mock up the backend for the QML project in QML, like you have a very simple mock-up for the C++ backend, so it still runs. And yeah, that's possible. Is it possible to re-import a 3D model without losing the changes on it in Qt Design Studio? If you did change the file that was exported from the 3D tool, like not a file around it, then at this point in time, your changes are lost. For the 2D, for Photoshop and Sketch, we do support merging, but at this point in time, we don't support merging for 3D. So unfortunately not, but for the 2D, the answer is actually that the changes are maintained, are retained. The next question is, can QDS import Figma designs? No, there's no support for that by us. It might be worth trying something like a Zeppelin or a Bridge, but from us, there's no direct support. Then the next question is also very good and interesting question is if the flow design can be used just for prototypes or also for like a real application. And actually this was a design goal that we cover both use cases. The flow you saw that Brook did was basically a prototype, but it was a prototype that could use the real components, maybe the real screens. Also, for example, the decision blocks, the way Brook used them, when they pop up a dialogue and ask you a question, that is, of course, not your final product, but you could basically also use conditions. So the flow decision also supports to make decisions on Booleans based on the backend. So what we try is really to allow to scale this flow from prototyping into real production. So the flow editor also has, for example, an index property that you can set, and then it will basically act like a stack view and try to choose the fitting transition. You can also put flows in flows. You can also use the flows to control states. You can go from one flow to another, and you can have multiple flows. So it's very, very powerful, but not everything of this is supported with the UI at this point in time. So we are a bit with our front end and Qt Design Studio, we are a bit behind what the items actually can do, but we try to provide more and more and more. And we really, really want that the whole flow view, we call it, scales into a production code, that you can reuse the effects and reuse the flows and reuse all the tooling also in real production. Yeah, then we showed the code. So it's normal QML code, which is all behind the flows. So then the next question is, when I go into a 3D component and there's no lighting or camera, then there's nothing visible. Actually, the camera is not required at all, so we don't need a camera. And there's an option in the 3D view. When you turn it on, you get some edit light. Then you get a default light, so get which is very bright actually. So we get some impression even if there's no light in your scene. Then the next question is, what does pre-transform vertices do in the import? And I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I'm pretty sure it will bake all the transformation of the scene graph into the vertices. So that makes the scene graph simpler. Yeah, it's a feature of the importer. So we have less transformations. The next question is how to configure show live preview on my Raspberry Pi. So how do I get the live preview on my embedded device, which Raspberry Pi is one example. So of course you need a device with Qt installed on, properly a boot to Qt image. And then with boot to Qt image and many devices, I think including the Raspberry Pi and iMac 6 and so on, we support, we have our own USB drivers, so you can connect it via USB. An alternative is also to use the network. And then in Qt Design Studio, also Qt Creator, you can set up the connection, you can add the device, you can register it. Then you have to change the kit to the deploy to embedded device kit, and then you can deploy to your device, including the Raspberry Pi. So I think we showed that in some webinars, and there's also documentation on it. But yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, then we showed the code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can you add easing curve to back binding previous screen? This is one of the things that's technically possible. We don't have good UI for it yet. So for example, each flow has a default transition. And actually, we probably want to provide even a list of default transition with black and white lists again. So would basically fall back then to the closest transition it can find. This is partially there, but it's not in the UI. And by now, it will always use the default transition that has the easing curve. You can edit, but we want to have that more powerful, so that basically you can have like several of these fallback transitions and then have more fine-grained control over that. But this is exactly what's required if you want to use that in real production. You want basically to define several transitions and with different effects depending on context and so on. The next question is, can flows also handle menus, basically a static menu on the left or the right? And there are several ways to do that. One way would be to embed the menu into the pages, which might be good enough for prototyping, but probably not what you want to do for production. Another way is to put those menu around your flow. Then it's not part of the flow, but you can put the flow into any other screen that has a side menu. You can
That's
also
what I wanted to say, yeah.
Own specific flow item that has a side menu attached to it. There are many ways to it. So the flow is basically at this point in time, you can think of it as a glorified stack view. So it doesn't stop you from doing anything around it, and you can stack flows into each other. So we have examples where we put flows into flows, and then actually use a flow to manage those menus. And inside we have the actual pages, which are also managed by a flow again. Then there's a question, is there a free version? Yes, there's a community version that is just lacking certain features that are only for commercial customers, like the ISO icons and Photoshop import and so on. But yes, there's a version you can use for free. Then there's just a comment, the flows are amazing. Great to hear, thank you. Then there's a question, whether the flows are QML underneath, and the answer is yes. There's no magic at all, it's just QML underneath. Then yes. Can a Qt project have multiple flows? Yes, and flows and flows, and you can
flows
change
and flows
from one flow to another.
Yeah.
And another question we often get is Adobe XD, and our current answer is we are researching that. So we definitely want to do that in the future, support for Adobe XD, importing flows from Adobe XD, having a really good and deep integration with Adobe XD. I think it's safe to say that that is a goal we have, but it's currently in research and we're working on it. Can I see all annotations in a component that I don't have to click item through? Yeah, you can Control A, but that's actually a good point. Maybe we need an overview of all the annotations, but for now we would basically have to Control A on the.
I think yes.
And we also have.
Yeah, I think that's something we should add. Yeah.
We have research on what we call specification generation. Then basically it would generate you a specification for your current file, including all the annotations.
And again, with the project underneath, yes, I think that searching annotations and listing all annotations is something that we need to look into, and hopefully that will be something that can be in an upcoming version.
Yeah, there's what came also up the idea of having tags as part of the annotations, and then filtering by tags and these kind of things to really find things in really big projects. Yeah, are there feature differences between the open source and the licensed version? Like as I said, it's the imports for Photoshop and Sketch and the ISO icons.
But if you want to use the new flow mode or anything like this, then that's also in the community edition. So if you just want to get hold of the community edition for 1.5 to test the flow mode, then that's totally possible.
Then will you send out a link to watch this video again later? I think so, yes. I think everybody who subscribed and registered will get the link to the video. Then the question is the QML code generated in Qt Design Studio ready to compile and run? And the answer is yes, yes. So you have to do sometimes a bit of extra work because we bring a couple of extra components like the flow view, which are part of Qt Design Studio. So we have to make them part of your C++ project by embedding them, but yeah, it's normal QML and you can run it as part of the C++ application. Yes. And then the next question is, are the docking feature also added to Qt Creator? Not yet. I mean, technically they are, the dock widgets are part of Qt Creator, but they're not used by the other parts of Qt Creator. So one reason is that some Linux window managers have a bit of problems with them, which is basically any window manager that doesn't support opacity. That's something we will most likely fix, which is not a concern for Qt Design Studio because I think very few designers will run those window managers. But this is also a bit up to the other Qt Creator guys, but I think it would be really nice to utilize them all over Qt Creator.
Hey, Thomas and Brook, this is Mark. Knowing we have about a minute left, thank you very much for addressing the questions. I know we didn't get to all of them.
Yes, sure we will try to answer the other question.
Yes, yeah. And, if we can get a printout of the rest of the questions, then we will find somewhere to answer them exactly on the website or.
Yep, absolutely. And so thank you both very much for an informative session, and thank you all for attending the session. If you're interested in giving any kind of feedback about the sessions of the virtual TechCon, back on the live event session, there's going to be a link to a survey. Feel free to address that. That's obviously optional. But thank you guys very much for attending, and well wishes and best of luck for on the other sessions you guys will be at for the virtual TechCon. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you
Thanks
very
very much, everybody.
Thank
Take care
you.
now. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Brooke, are you still